Kia ora koutou katoa. The story today from Genesis 37 is popularized in Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical Joseph and His Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's part of the foundational stories of Israel. Webber's reading of it, though, is rather simplistic in that he paints Joseph as a bright star and his brothers as jealous and violent. The text is more nuanced, with the father Jacob, also known as Israel, playing favourites amongst his sons, as he had between his wives, and thus sowing the seeds of enmity. And the 17-year-old Joseph flaunting his favoured status and his giftedness in his brothers' faces. As the story progresses, the brothers undergo a conversion, repenting of the violent wrong they did to Joseph and trying to create a better future. But not so for Jacob and Joseph, who show no signs of any awareness of their self-centeredness and continue to see themselves as the sun around which all worlds should orbit. You might have noticed, but God has disappeared. There are no longer any wrestling matches or stairways to heaven like earlier in the Jacob saga. I'm sure some would say that Joseph's dreams were from God, but I'm not so sure we should ascribe the rise to political power or the forewarnings from the dreams world, or for that matter, historical events, as the handiwork of God. Where can we, if anywhere, detect God? Not just in this story, but in life as a whole. What or who is God? Where might God be hiding? This morning I want to give you a brief snapshot into this big question from the thinking of 5 theologians of the past. And this big question is, where is God? I'll start with Meister. Meister means master, as in mastering a discipline. Meister Eckhart. He was a popular German Dominican theologian and philosopher from the 14th century. During his life, many of his teachings were formally condemned and suppressed, and in his old age he was tried for heresy, but died before his conviction and papal censure. Eckhart believed that virtually all human concepts of God tell us more about ourselves than about God. God's not an old man or human-like or even a he. God is not good or wise or just. Those are all human attributes. God, explained, was not a being or a supreme being, but being as an existence itself. Eckhart thus considered the question, does God exist, to be meaningless. How can one question whether existence exists? For him, God is pure mystery, incomprehensible. Eckhart therefore dedicated himself to teaching others how to gain a heightened awareness of God's presence within their own lives. God's in all things, he said. Every creature is a word of God. My ground is God's ground, and God's ground is mine. He was a mystic. His approach challenges us, challenges the church, to stop projecting our concepts and agendas onto God and instead focus on the experience of the divine that leads us to lives of love and service. The best name for God, said Eckhart, is compassion. For those of us brought up with a deity who stands separate from and yet in charge of the world, demanding obedience or else, and needing religious institutions to manage all that, Eckhart's message is profoundly unsettling. Then chronologically, let's skip forward a few centuries to the late 18th and 19th, when we come to Fredrich Schleiermacher, Prussian Protestant theologian and philosopher who is accredited with reconciling the insights of the Enlightenment with Protestant Christianity. He develops a method for Christian theology that mediates faith to modern thought. Experience now gets the first and prime word in Christian theology. The object of theology is no longer God in the most direct sense, but rather the experience of God. This way of imagining Christian thought came to be called liberal theology. It's had a huge impact. It's not that different, actually, from Eckhart's. Then we come to Alfred Whitehead, 1861 to 1947. He was an English mathematician and philosopher, and the parent of process theology and philosophy. Traditional Western philosophy spoke of static, discrete beings and enduring substances and essences. And this is why that traditional formulation of Jesus being God and man was so problematic. But Whitehead viewed the universe very differently. He viewed it as an interconnected organism, with every event affecting everything else, and God being within this framework, not outside of it. Therefore, God is affected by processes and changes. The God space within process theology is the divine urge or energy or life in the universe. Another way of saying this is God is an all immanent, pervasive spirit rather than an all-powerful external being. The process God is both in everything and yet more than the sum of its parts, working in us and the world, affecting and affected by events of the universe. An enduring characteristic of process theology, as it's gone on to be developed by many thinkers, is a rejection of theologies that privilege being over becoming. So God is not unchanging, but is affected by temporal processes. As Whitehead said, it is as true to say that God creates the world as the world creates God. Sounds very much like Lloyd Gearing, doesn't it? Let's move to Gordon Kaufman, 1925 to 2011, American theologian and professor. Like Schleiermacher and Whitehead, he also tried to reconcile the then contemporary understanding of science and philosophy with theology. Kaufman is motivated by today's ecological crisis caused by human actions, which he says is a bigger issue than Christianity has ever faced. In the past, Christianity has been preoccupied with existential questions of guilt and sin, happiness, and so forth. Kaufman concludes that the traditional understanding of Christianity may be in the way of finding solutions to this crisis. Kaufman's also aware that developments in science have shown us a much bigger universe than was once thought to exist. A personal God is not an idea that is comprehensible in this type of setting. Starting with the notion offered in the Bible of God as creator, Kaufman offers a proposal of God as serendipitous creativity. God is creativity. Creativity as an ultimate mystery that somehow was involved in the initial coming into being of the universe, in evolutionary processes, in human symbolic activity. This conception connects the understanding of God with today's ideas of the Big Bang, cosmic and biological evolution, the evolutionary emergence of novel, complex realities from simpler realities, and so on. It also eliminates anthropomorphism, making God into human, and anthropocentrism, putting humans at the center of everything. It removes these from the conception of God. Kaufman goes on to say that this mystery of creativity, also known as God, is awe-inspiring, calling forth emotions of gratitude, love, peace, fear, and hope, and a sense of profound meaningfulness in human existence. In Kaufman's words, this mystery of creativity called God serves as a living symbol in our culture. Lastly, Rosemary Ruether These, an American Roman Catholic professor. She was one of the foremost feminist theologians of the 20th century. Ruether, like other liberation and feminist theologians, cannot divide God from how we act, cannot divide theology from ethics, divinity from activity. To each theology and theologian of the past, she would bring questions of, so what? What difference does believing in this God produce? Does believing in your God encourage or discourage the struggle for justice for the oppressed? For if your God is not working for justice in real people's lives, then your God is working to prevent justice becoming a reality. Ruether understood God, which he wrote as God \_ESS, God S. She wrote this to move past the patriarchal impoverishment and manipulation of God. So she understood God as an empowering matrix, manifested in many ways and in many historical contexts. Like the other thinkers I've mentioned, Ruether held that God is not the preserve of it or property of any faith or religion. She recovers the image of the divine as this primal empowering matrix, the womb from which all things are generated, the ground of being. And while the Bible suppressed these images, the biblical tradition nevertheless understands God as liberating. The Bible's critique of idolatry means that the divine must be understood as both male and female, yet neither male or female. God \_S is Ruether's way of signifying that we as yet have no adequate name for the divine. As well as the maleness of God, Ruether also criticized the parent metaphor, making God into mother or father or teacher leaves us infantile and not empowering us as adults to take responsibility and to change the world. While it's tempting to keep going and share with you further insights of further thinkers and theologians, but I wanted to speak briefly about these 5 in the context of God's disappearance in our text today, and then God's reappearance in the next book, Exodus, and then disappearance in later books like Esther or the Song of Songs. For God keeps appearing and disappearing, by which I mean, of course, following Eckhart and Schleiermacher, how we understand God keeps appearing and disappearing in our texts and histories and language. These 5 thinkers have helped us, whether we've known it or not, to move from the distant, authoritative, supreme being God, who loves and judges the earth, into understanding God in our lives and in all being, Eckhart, in our experience, Schleiermacher, in the changing processes of becoming, Whitehead, as creativity itself, herself, Kaufman, and as an empowering matrix as we work for social change, Ruether. God might not speak or command, but in and through us God can be and act. Because we can and must deconstruct the old patriarchal power God, who continues to serve powerful patriarchal interests, does not mean we can't find or be found by an empowering, flowering God in the love and mutuality we share, and in our work to create and recreate justice on earth. Blessings to you.